Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Ridin the Storm Out. You have in this chair Pastor Paul Blair, and over here my co-pastor and cohort in crime,
Dan Fisher, sitting in a very short stool that I'm hoping will be replaced eventually.
We're going to get a booster seat for him next week. But we have a lot of great stuff to talk about this week. Of course, it has been an interesting week. First of all, we've seen all the debate with Twitter, with Elon Musk purchasing Twitter. Don't you love seeing a billionaire actually using his money for something
positive
other than global governance and tyranny? I love
just defend liberty. Isn't that incredible?
A man of principle. I believe he's a libertarian, and he truly wants to see free speech allowed in the public square. So that's been some good news. Of course, good news going on in Florida as Governor Ron DeSantis, who is maybe Elon Musk and Ron DeSantis will be the fourth or the fifth and sixth faces to go on Mount Rushmore,
I think so.
if we're to retain liberty.
Yeah.
But Ron DeSantis pushing back against the big mouse who's trying to indoctrinate our children into LGBTQ plus AA, whatever else they have on there. And then, of course, we've seen Netflix bomb with their stock. And, of course, Netflix was proactive.
Couldn't happen to a better company.
Doing things, trying to groom children for sexual activities.
Don't forget CNN Plus.
And CNN, that was beautiful.
What a wonderful experience.
300 million, and it lasted for 30 days.
Oh, yeah, man.
But last night, I think, caught us all by surprise. I wasn't aware there was going to be something announced, and obviously it wasn't supposed to be announced this early. But we know that last night there was a report that leaked out of the Supreme Court that Justice Alito had written the majority decision, or was in the process of writing a majority decision, that was going to reverse Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
And of course, you could hear the weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth from the liberals that want to continue to slaughter babies from coast to coast.
Course. Yeah, we're ending death. What a terrible thing to do.
And this could be, Dan, the loose thread that actually that undoes a lot of error that has crept into our governance.
Could it be?
Because there was never a case where the federal government, and especially the Supreme Court, was supposed to issue decisions to rule over, change law over 325 million people.
No.
That's not what you're supposed to do.
Well, Paul, and you know this, and our listeners probably do, but in case they don't, check out Federalist 45.
Mm-hmm.
When those guys were being questioned, what does this new government have the power to do? Because you got to remember, in that day, people were far more concerned about what government could do to them than what government could do for them. So they're concerned, and so Madison and other guys write these essays called the Federalist Papers. And in 45, Madison says, look, this new government does not have the power over the states. They're just going to be given these general, very limited authorities. And beyond that, everything that touches normal day life is reserved to the states.
Right.
And we have seen over, I would argue over more than a century, but certainly in the last 50 to 75 years, we have seen the court just pretty much make the rest of government irrelevant. We don't even need it. They're just a clearinghouse to get to the nine big guys.
And by a 5-4 decision, they can change gravity if they choose to.
No, exactly. So they can redefine marriage and play God. They can determine when life begins, when you can snuff out the life of an unborn child. In 1857, they decided that a black man was black property. I mean, come on, please.
How many times have they been wrong before?
Oh, yeah, right. So many times that it's really, really seriously sad that we've allowed ourselves to be painted into this corner.
And the sad thing is this: we've gotten here because we don't know what the Constitution actually is. Yep. And it does not grant us any rights. We don't have constitutional rights. We have unalienable rights that were given to us by God, declared in the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution was simply an operating agreement. 13 sovereign nations or states created a limited central or general government, and the states delegated few, as Federalist 45 says,
few and
defined powers to the federal government. Anything that the states didn't give the federal government permission to do, they can't do.
Exactly.
So most of what they now do is do. Actually, it's not part of the constitutional.
You're right. There's another word I'm thinking of right now, but still.
But yesterday was a great pushback because here's what happened. Over the years, we have seen the federal government just take upon itself more and more power, which quite frankly they don't have as was delegated in the Constitution. One of the most egregious, or several of the most egregious, you mentioned Dred Scott.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
In 1962, 63, they took the Bible, the Supreme Court took the Bible and prayer out of federal school.
Out,
no
gone.
No
Ten
authority
Commandments
to do
gone,
that.
1985.
That's right. And then we saw in 73, they changed the way abortions were handled in the United States. Up until that time, each state determined whether abortions were legal and to what extent. In 1973, and of course Roe versus Wade is the famous case, the Supreme Court redefined what rights were guaranteed in the Constitution. Came up with a term called penumbra of rights, including the right to privacy. You cannot find that in the Constitution. But from that, they derived unfettered abortion on all 50 states. That was against the law.
Exactly.
But it's operated that way until this last year. The state of Mississippi, one of many states that have tried to roll back and end abortion. Oklahoma also. Many states have. Usually the courts just strike it down. Well, Mississippi tried to roll back the abortion laws to where they can stop it at 15 weeks. I mean, they ought to be stopped altogether.
No, of course.
But they were just trying to stop it at 15 weeks. That case percolated up, called the Dobbs v. Jackson case, and that's what the Supreme Court is listening to right now. And basically what Alito said is that Roe versus Wade was such a corruption of judicial authority, was so bad that it looks like they're just going to throw it out. And what that'll happen is they're going to give it, as you hear the wailing from the godless left out there, this is not going to end abortion in the United States of America. If only it did. May we come to a day where we want to stop murdering our own children. Or maybe we have a day where we recognize that sexuality was a gift that God gave us to be held sacred within marriage, and children are a blessing and a gift from God. And we parents have the responsibility to raise our own children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, make them good citizens, hopefully lead them to where they trust Christ one day. That's how it was designed, not how we do it now. But all this is going to do is going to give this back to the states, which was theirs to begin with, and then each state could determine what they're going to do.
Yeah, and Paul, let me say, because there may be some people saying, well, now, Dan and Paul, if we do this, doesn't that then mean that you've got all these different sets of standards and laws in all 50 states, and that they'll be very different from each other? In fact, that is exactly what the framers envisioned. That's actually what existed when the Constitution was written. And so if we could just understand that things like the first 10 amendments that we so revere, called the Bill of Rights, were actually only written applicable to the federal government. It was only with the incorporation doctrine that they flipped those to the states. Now you say, well, Dan, don't you think that states ought to recognize the freedom of speech, freedom of religion? Yes, I do, but that would be left up to every state. That's why each state has a state constitution. So somebody would say, well, what if I live in a state where they don't honor the Second Amendment? Move. Or vote that government out and fix your state. So it's going to be the same thing with abortion. If abortion was, and I hesitate to say returned to the states because it was the states' rights to begin with, but if this happens, then we're back to where we should have been. And so if somebody lives in a state that is so pro-death that they're never going to stop abortion, then I think those Christian people need to seriously consider packing up and moving to a state where they practice belief and support of life. So really, this is what the framers intended, and people worried about, well, this is just going to create chaos. Well, no, you have 50 different states, 50 different state constitutions, borders, the whole deal.
It's like, to some degree, you can decide right now if you want to live in New York and pay a state income tax that's 11 or 12%, or California, or maybe you want to move to Oklahoma where you have a lower income tax, or Florida where you have no income tax. That's where the states are states, and they determine their own governing authority within its own borders. We all have unalienable God-given rights. In America, all 50 states are supposed to recognize natural law, and that's why we have always adhered to...
Found in the Declaration, by the way.
Exactly. That's why we adhere to what we know as a normal traditional family.
Sure.
Because that's what the Bible defines. That's why murder is wrong. Theft is wrong.
Yeah.
Private property is guaranteed, because all those things were mentioned in the Bible under natural law.
But, and as you know this though, Paul, if you go back and look at the original state constitutions, now we're talking about the 13 originally, and then the others started to come along one by one. But all of those state constitutions reiterated all of those things. But what they didn't need was this overreaching, overbearing federal government telling them what to believe. The states are more than capable of determining what they consider to be moral and immoral, right and wrong. And if you had this, I guarantee you, Paul, we would have a much greater, stronger union.
Absolutely.
As the Constitution was designed to make a more perfect
So
union.
you and I are conservative Christians. We would be called fundamentalists.
Well, at least I'm a Christian. I'm not sure.
But we believe that states should be states. And if a liberal state wants to be liberal, then they can be. But if conservative states
want to be... us.
Exactly. And that's why the union was done. We aren't one nation under God. We are a union of sovereign states that work together for our common defense and for our general welfare.
Well, and you know, Paul, I think that's important. You didn't mean to get off on this, but the reason why we've gotten this idea of one nation under God, indivisible, is because of the words of the Pledge of Allegiance. And we probably ought to do a program on that sometime.
Yeah.
It's somewhat controversial, but we just...
Hasn't been around forever. George Washington didn't do it.
No, and our folks need to know that it was actually a Christian socialist by the name of Francis Bellamy that actually wrote the pledge. But see, if we could understand that many of the things that we believe are in the Declaration or they're in the Constitution actually aren't, we would be far better off. And so the idea of separation of church and state, they'll say, well, that's in the Constitution, that's in the Declaration of Independence, or it's in the Bible. No, it's not in any one of those. It's a myth that's been dreamed up. And so when you get to something like abortion, you have this overreach of a godless government forced on 50 states.
Right.
Now, what this could do, if it legitimately happens the way this leak seems to imply that it will, it'll put us back on equal footing where every state then can fight this battle at the state level and determine what's right for their people.
That's exactly right.
And that's what it was supposed to be.
And those states that still revere or fear God, we don't have to murder, or we don't have to support the murder of our preborn children.
We do not.
You know what's really funny about all this is the group that professes to be liberal or freedom-minded, or they just want to provide freedom. They are the ones that are the most restrictive. They're the ones that are howling over Elon Musk buying Twitter and actually having unfettered free speech in the marketplace of ideas.
Well, in fact, somebody has said, so this means that maybe Twitter would actually block certain politicians they don't like.
Yeah,
well, they just threw the president of the United States off just a few months ago. But see, that was okay because it lined up with their thinking. They don't really believe in freedom of speech. They don't believe in freedom of choice. Even though they call themselves pro-choice, they want to force abortion on all 50 states.
And this is something we need to consider in our listening audience, where this is heading, because it's going to happen very rapidly. You know, we're going to hear that the world's coming to an end because the choice of whether abortion is legal in a state or not will now go back to that particular state. But you see, the leftists, the progressives, Marxists that are now what's called the Democrat Party are howling and saying, well, we've got to do something immediately. We've got to pack the Supreme Court, basically make it irrelevant. We've got to codify abortion into law. And to do that, we're going to have to do away with the filibuster and use a 51 to 49 or 51-50, actually probably be a tie-breaking vote, because I'm not sure that Manchin would go along with this, to force this into law illegally, because they don't want states to be states.
No.
They like a monolithic, oppressive government, all ruling from Washington, D.C. And what may happen, we are either going to see true federalism, which is what Dan's been talking about, where states are states. If Oklahoma wants to be conservative, Oklahoma can be conservative. If California wants to be liberal, they can be liberal. We work together for our common defense and for our general welfare. And we're either going to see that, or we're going to see the other side try to push too far, which is what they're planning on doing. And at that point in time, we need to consider maybe it's just time for a divorce.
Well, and I think so, Paul. In fact, you're hearing the left right now. Of course, this is brand new. This is just really come to light last night. But you're already hearing some spokespeople of the left saying the Supreme Court's the problem. We've got to deal with the Supreme Court. Well, isn't it funny that they weren't saying the Supreme Court was the problem whenever they redefined marriage, Or they passed Roe v. Wade to begin with. They were
Threw
celebrating
the Bible out of schools.
and
It was okay. Took the Ten Commandments off property. Supreme Court's just great. Now the decisions aren't going their way. The Supreme Court's probably got to add numbers to the court.
Now, see, I would argue they're actually right. The Supreme Court has been the problem because it's not supposed to be deciding these issues to begin with. So really, in an odd, kind of weird, ironic way, they are correct.
This is forcing us to come full circle and come back to the Constitution.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, we're for that. If California wants to reestablish federalism, if Maine and Massachusetts want to reestablish federalism, so they can be as liberal as they want to be. If they want to redefine marriage as 6 men and a goat, well, help yourself. If you want to kill, California's even talking about killing children outside the womb.
After they're born.
Godless and decayed and wicked are they? Well, if they want to, they can face God's wrath on their own.
Now, what
Oklahoma and
trimester?
Texas.
Now, what trimester did you say that Pelosi is
I
in?
think Nancy. I want abortion in the 241st trimester, which would be Pelosi at about age 81. Yeah. I think she is a problem pregnancy right there that needs to be.
Well, I mean, but Paul, if you stop and think about it, as ridiculous as that seems, that's really where the ultimate end is. If you can murder a baby, I would argue in the womb, but in California's case, outside the womb, then when does that murdering stop, or when does it stop being murder?
Well, the hypocrisy is there right now. In Oklahoma, as you know, when you ran for governor, because this was a cornerstone, part of your platform.
That's right.
In Oklahoma law, it actually calls abortion homicide. But then after 1973, they amended it and said, unless it's performed by a medical doctor.
And then it's not homicide.
So I guess it's like a 007. You have a license to kill. It's murder to kill a preborn child, because we know it's a preborn child. It's a human being. It's got a human father. It's got a human mother. It is alive. Yeah. It's got 10 toes, 10 fingers, its own heart, its own brain, its own circulatory system. It's not part of the mother. It is another person in the mother by God's
DNA,
design.
different fingerprint.
Different sex half the time.
Exactly.
But if there's a point where you can terminate that life, or when do you determine what life is of value or not?
Yeah.
I mean, we are talking about human beings here. We're talking depends. Fundamental, unalienable right.
Well,
right
it depends.
to life.
If you're Hitler, then you decide who needs to live and who doesn't. Mm-hmm. To show you how this is a perfect example of relativism, in Oklahoma today, the law states that if a woman is on her way through an intersection and a drunk runs the signal light and slams into her and she's pregnant and she has a miscarriage, that drunk is guilty of murder.
Double.
But if he kills them both, then it's double. But if she was actually on her way to an abortion clinic and she makes it through the intersection, then the abortionist is not committing murder. Now, that is relativism in its perfect example, circular reasoning.
And it's pure hypocrisy.
We
have to be objective. You know, it's like when you go to a sporting event, you want the official to call fair. You want the umpire to call balls and strikes for both teams.
Yeah.
We just want some objectivity. We're fine with that. Again, baby murder is wrong.
Yeah, of course. Any murder
marriage is one man and one woman, period. Anything out that is not marriage. It's something you've just made up. But if California or Massachusetts or Minnesota wants to be insane and say, hey, we're going to make gravity against the law, well, knock yourself out. You can do. But in Oklahoma and Texas and Florida and those of us that haven't completely lost our minds, we want to retain the Declaration of Independence and actually retain what supposedly the Constitution was supposed to be, which was establishing a limited general government and states maintaining their own authority within their own borders.
And see, these are issues that I believe pastors ought to be dealing with from the pulpit. Man, this is a great opportunity. That's exactly right.
We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be America if it wasn't for pastors.
No.
And now we're about to not be America because of the pastors. We've lost it. Exactly.
You're right.
Well, it's been a great week. Hopefully we'll have more exciting good news to report.
You bet.
And just keep your eyes on the news, and also always keep your eyes towards heaven. I'm listening for that shofar.
Yeah, that's right.
And as you said before, if Paul, I'm concerned if the rapture comes, would you please water my horses?
Well, so I'm hoping you'll feed my horses once I'm gone.
Well, I intend to beat you up in many ways now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, for a long time, man.
Thanks for joining us for this week's edition of Ridin the Storm Out, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then,
God bless you.
God bless you.